Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Congregation Bet El, the house of God. What a beautiful synagogue. For all those that are here, welcome. For all those watching online, welcome as well to a very important community-wide event. We want to thank the Shul for opening its doors, Bet El, all of the community schools as well that have joined together. Organizations Chazak, Emet, Amudim have come together for this very, very, very important topic. And it's something that we need not to hide under the rugs. Unfortunately, we've seen many tragedies, many issues, many difficulties, many problems with this drug problem in our communities. And we need to step forward and make a difference and speak about it and let the world know. I know many, many people all over the world said, wow, you guys are great, you guys are putting together this event, but we live in this part of the world, in this part of the world, in that city, in that state, or we can't make it tonight. People, unfortunately, are not feeling well, whatever it is. Everybody was asking for it to watch online because they know the importance of the topic. So I'm very happy that we put this together. One point, unfortunately, our Ilan is not able to make it, so I'm going to fill in for just a short Dvar Torah. We're going to bring in our featured speaker, Rabbi Benzim Chatzo, all the way from Monsey, Shabbat.com. Needs no introduction in our community. I do want to give a shout out to my friend Richie over here for arranging and initiating and pushing for this important topic in our community. And of course, a shout out to Rabbi Eva for all that he does for our community and videos over here as well, and all those that have made it. So, Vayidal Hayelet, this past week's Parshat Shemot, we all know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born. It's about his life. But what does it mean that he grew? He was a child and he grew up? In the literal sense, yes. But at the following verse, it says, he went out to see the difficulties, the hardships of his people, the Jewish people, and that's what made him a gadol, what made him great. We're all striving for greatness to become great people, and what a person is gadol, is big, doesn't mean in size, but it means his caring for others. And the fact that we've come over here tonight to hear the topic of drug awareness and prevention, it really is very, 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 very important. And we all know that all we have to do is try, like Batya, right, the daughter of Paro. She saw the basket, she reached out her hand, it was farther than what she could reach, but God Almighty did the rest and her hand extended. Same thing with our community. We have to just do whatever we got to do. We have to try. This is what we're doing tonight. We're sticking out our hands and God Almighty, Hashem Yitbarach, Hashem, make us, Hashem be successful. At this time, it's our honor and privilege to call upon a man, like I said, needs no introduction. Rabbi Benzim Chatzo, all the way from Monsey, does so much for Klal Yisrael, is aware of this topic very, very much, being with the work that he does with Olami and the college campuses all over the world. Without further ado, let's give a round of applause to Rabbi Benzim Chatzo.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to give you words of introduction. I'm not going to be giving you an entire speech, as it were. I think if we open our eyes and we look around the community, we should be startled, we should be shaken to our core. In our home, we have a basement, and the basement was finished. It was finished at great expense, and in the basement there's a plaque, and the plaque is named after a young man who was somebody with tremendous midos, somebody who loved Hashem, loved Torah, and he shouldn't have left this world so quickly, except that on Friday night, he, together with his friends, made l'chaims, and they made a few more, and unfortunately, this young man did not wake up. And we dedicated our basement and an achnosas archim to this young man. And the baltashchis, the waste of a neshama, of the potential of a person who could have raised a family and children and grandchildren just to go to sleep Friday night and not wake up. What led to that? What leads to our community thinking that part and parcel of being Jewish or a frum Jew or a modern geschmacka lebedika frum Jew involves the ingestion of substances? What How did we get to where we are today? It's a longer question than I can answer right now, but it does go back at least a few hundred years. Things like Besam and Keturus, and they had all sorts of holy names for things that today we understand, we know are hallucinogenics. They are things that are addictive. They are substances that we make part of our Yiddishkeit. And it never had to be this way. Years ago, my brother, Alav Shalom, his name was Gavriel, he had a shul in Johannesburg, and he proposed something quite novel. It was Simchas Torah, and he said, I'd like to have a dry Simchas Torah. And this is more of a Baal Tshuva shul. It's called the Sunny Road Synagogue. A lot of people were not born religious. And they were going to celebrate Simchas Torah. So he said, I'd like to practice doing a dry Simchas Torah. Let's celebrate the Torah for the sake of the Torah. And sure enough, the people in his shul were respectful, and they did not bring the vodka, they did not bring the substances, and they danced and they sang, except that there was a group of Geschmacke guys that were Bachrim from another shul nearby in the neighborhood, and those Bachrim were shul hopping, and they ended up in his shul with their bottles of booze. And once they brought the bottles, people began to drink, and other people got drunk. After the dancing, after Musaf, there was a communal meal. And my brother, Alav Shalom, said, we're so happy that you came. It's such an honor that each of you came to our Simchas Torah. But next time I'm going to ask you, please don't bring your friends. And everyone's looking around, I shouldn't bring my friends? What do you mean I shouldn't bring my friends? He says, no, I'm asking you, please don't bring your friends. Which friends do I mean? You don't have to bring Jack and you don't have to bring Johnny. Next time, don't bring Jack and Johnny. We don't need Jack Daniels. We don't need Johnny Walker. We should be able to be mesameach with our own Yiddishkeit without needing the substances. That's the struggle. And today, and I'm going to give you a little bit of the evolution, unfortunately, we are living through a lot of difficult challenges, and one of them is that there are people who unfortunately have gone off the derech. Kids at risk, people have gone off the derech. Even people who came from very religious or even Hasidic homes, they've left Torah mitzvahs. However, many of them end up coming back. But when they come back, they want to refashion, recreate their Judaism. The austere, the strict, the stern, the halacha, very exacting, they felt repelled them. So instead, there's a new version. And the new version could involve a simcha, a kalbach davening, a kumsitz at night, a barbecue. And it's a much more mellow version of Yiddishkeit. And there's what to be said for people feeling comfortable and happy within Judaism. But somehow, what glammed on to this kind of Judaism, this kind of wonderful, warm, loving, open mellowness became the heter, the permissibility, maybe even the encouragement of things like a l'chaim, or smoking up, or feeling good, so we'll share pills amongst ourselves. And having lived in a frum community, now for many years, I used to live in the UCLA campus, and we sort of expected that on a campus, but in the frum community, you would expect us to be able to find meaning within Yiddishkeit without needing these substances. Yeshaya HaNavi speaks about this way back when. He already said that there will be a time This is the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, where Hashem says, I did not need you. I didn't need your bamos. I didn't need you to come to Ramos Chatzeroi. I didn't need that, because you came with a hololus. You came with a simcha that was not the simcha shel mitzvah, but it turned out to be the simcha of other things. It was too much. We know when the Aron Kodesh was brought back to Plishtim, they couldn't take the Aron Kodesh, they had stolen it, and then they had to give it back because there was a big magefa. There was a big magefa. So it was brought back to Beit Shemesh, and what happened? There was this kind of simcha which ended up in disaster and magefa for the Yidden. Why? They were so besimcha, they got the Aron Kodesh back. But there's a way of being besimcha without the external stimuli. And unfortunately, the external stimuli has become part of Judaism today. It's become not just permitted, but it's become part of what we do. So if you have a kiddush, or you have a kiddush club, or a kiddush afterwards, you've got to have bottles and bottles of tequila and vodka. And unfortunately, our children are watching, and they see, and they're learning what makes Tati or Abba happy. And then when they're 13, they're 14, they're 15, they try it themselves. And if not that, then they're chugging down cans of beer. And eventually, in our own community, which is supposed to be kadoshim to you, perushim to you, to be able to separate what is worthwhile from what isn't, from what is the crutch, what is the external stimuli, eventually the lines become blurred. There's a halacha, and the halacha is Shisui asher lispalal, v'im ispalal tfilasa to'eva. A person who was drunk, asher lispalal, can't daven. And if he davens, his tefillah is called to'eva. It's disgusting. And you would think, why? The opposite. You know, you've heard the rabbi say, the best speech I give is after a nice cup of tequila, a nice cup of vodka. Best speech that I give. You see singers all the time, even in the Jewish world, before they come on stage, sometimes on stage, they'll bring the cup to stage, they'll look at everyone, they say, L'chaim, and they chug down an entire cup of vodka, and then they begin Mashiach, Mashiach, and the message becomes clear. The message is that you're not good enough. You're not comfortable in your own skin. You feel full of anxiety, and the best way for you to escape you is to bathe your brain with other substances so that I don't have to think anymore. And unfortunately, it's called addiction for a reason. And there are certain substances that are emotionally addictive, certain that are chemically addictive, certain that are both. But an addiction means I am doing something that is not good for me. And ultimately, it's going to stop me from functioning properly. I can't function unless I have the following pills in my system. So I'm a cripple. I can't be myself unless I have my cups of wine in the morning. So I'm the housewife that takes the cups of wine in the morning just to feel normal. One of the beautiful things that the Torah gives us is a sense of value even when we're not feeling our best. We're allowed to say, I'm not feeling great today. We're allowed to say, you know what? Yeah, my head is not the sharpest. I'm not having the best kavanah, but I'm going to battle. I'm going to do milchama. It doesn't say anywhere, no, you're mechuyev to feel your best always, and therefore, if you need help, here's your help. Here's the help, because you got to be at your best. Could you imagine if a rabbi says, I have to be on every day, so I'll take a cup of wine before I teach second grade. I'll take a cup of vodka before I give my best medrash share. But it's become normal. And I would say that that's the most dangerous thing. And unfortunately, in our community, Kimat a week does not go by, nearly a week does not go by, when we don't hear of another person who has overdosed, another person who has died of alcohol poisoning, another person who is addicted and they've become psychotic. And it's more than ever. And the anxiety and the depression and the lack of feeling good in our own skin. So what do we do about this? How do we put a halt to what's become a normalized epidemic in our community? How do we say, no, this is not okay? How do we not understand that if we let this go, it will get worse and not better? So the first thing is, we have to understand that if somebody is already taking these things, they are a chola, they're ill. An addiction creates an illness, and I know the older generation didn't like to hear this. What do you mean? You caused yourself your own illness. It is an illness, unfortunately. And it has to be treated with a certain degree of rachmanis. It has to be treated with very delicate hands. It's one of the reasons why even today we're backtracking from just throwing people in jail because they have substance addictions. But there are places to get treatment. And we have to understand the pikuach nefashos that's involved. If we don't get these people treatment, if we don't get our children treatment, only bad things can happen. Eventually, unfortunately, their lives will go to pot. It will destroy them. And some of it can be in the name of Yiddishkeit, and it still is very destructive. So there are experts out there in the field, and there are organizations like Amudim that deserve our support, because what they're doing is unique. They're speaking about it, they're getting the help, the therapy that's needed, they're finding homes for people who are struggling, they're helping them wean off of substances. We're not immune to it. The opposite, it is infiltrated much quicker than anyone thought it would. Years ago, when it was time for me to move to Muncie, someone said, careful, this is starting. And this is 15 years ago. I said, and I said, that can't be. And yet I can tell you, every week, even in my own house, people come in. Of course, we don't let it. But in my own house, people come in. Is it okay if I smoke weed here? Is it okay if I take this? Do you have extra Adderall? Do you have extra this? Do you have extra that? I need something to calm me. I need something to pick me up. Without achrayus, without understanding, what are we using it for? How are we using it? Was it prescribed? We don't need it for our Yiddishkeit. We need to get the help. And we can't close our eyes and say our community, it's not part of us. It's here. It's not coming. It's here. It exists. It's almost in the category of ki ein bayis asher ein shames. There's no home where there's at least someone, if not a sibling, if not a child, then a relative, then a friend, somebody that we know that has struggled with this and is currently struggling. And unfortunately, it's killing our children. It's killing them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be in control. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be able to control our Yetzer Hara, and when we've fallen, we have the resources now to pick ourselves up. So I ask Frankel to come and give us the resources. Thank you. Ish Yisrael Yazaru Lachiv Yamar Chazak. Let me repeat what you're saying, because they can't hear from the mic. So I'm going to repeat. We have somebody here who works in a funeral home, and what's your name? Saul. And Saul says one of the worst things that we're doing in our community is that when there's somebody who passes away, maybe even particularly a young person, we're told to keep quiet that it was from an overdose. And because of that, we don't hear. And of course, the family feels embarrassed, they feel ashamed. No one wants to blame the nifter, because the old attitude was that, who told you to start with this stuff in the first place? So therefore, you're the cause of your own death. What an embarrassment, what a shame. So let's keep it quiet. But by keeping it quiet, what happens? We think the problem doesn't exist, or we think it's much smaller than it actually is. today we're being more progressive when it comes to addiction. We understand that our children are much, much more exposed to this stuff than we ever were. Growing up, I did not know what weed looked like. I had no idea. Never occurred to me. It was like so off the radar. Now, it seems like every child at the age of 15, 16 has a question, should I smoke weed or not? Like, it became something. And then the pills are being prescribed as a go-to instead of as a backup, or instead of as a later resort. Let's start with this, because otherwise it's hard work. And the pharmacy companies, as we know, they're being sued for this. But the psychiatrists, they're incentivized to offer this to their patients. So they're incentivized. The patients are getting it. The parents are happy because the kids seem to be acting normal. The kids not only feel normal if they have this stuff in their system, and the more they have, they say, if I can feel normal, if I take this amount, I'll feel much more normal. If I can get B's on a test, then I can get A's on a test if I take more. And then they get older and they need larger doses. And then they're told, okay, you know what? I have a quick metabolism, so I got to take more. So you know, my quick metabolism. So let's take more. Let's take more. So now I'll take 3 a day. I'll take 4 a day. Quick metabolism. Let's up the dose. And then I mean, I can go on. And this is not even my area. I'm just from hearing what happens. And then unfortunately, more kids die from this than from car accidents. And it hits our community. And what do we do about it? We, like you said, like Saul is saying, it's hush hush. It's quiet. Why is it quiet? Because we're ashamed. So maybe, like you said, with other issues that our community has had, we have to stand up and agree that yes, we have Torah, but Kadosh Baruch Hu also made us flesh and blood, and we have the same taivas, and the internet is still floating out there, and the messages are floating out there. And this has hit our kids in a big way. It's hit them. And we have to pull on the brakes right now. Okay, so having said that, we're going to learn how to do that. We have one more. Last question is we want real solutions. So tell me your first name again. Stephen. Of course I remember you. Of course I remember you. I want to put into words what Stephen is saying, and then we could end with this. It's such a simple point. Today, again, we've drifted into alcohol versus drugs, so you'll get us on track. But today, alcohol has become a status symbol. It's a status symbol. And the stupidity, if I can say this, is that the whole thing is nonsense. And people come to my house, I have an 18-year-old Woodruff, I have a 21-year-old thing. And everyone, oh, wow, you got this bottle, that bottle. And the truth is, A, most people don't know the difference. C, by raising it up, by putting it on a pedestal, we make it a thing. So even people who can't stand the taste, they just drink because it's time to drink. Everyone is drinking, so the peer pressure makes me want to drink. Believe it or not, most people don't enjoy alcohol. That's the truth. I'm saying it right here. Thank you. Most people don't enjoy alcohol. You know why? Because it burns and it tastes disgusting. Okay, I'm just, sorry, I hate to be honest. But most people don't like alcohol. So why do we drink it if it tastes terrible and it burns? Well, I like to get dizzy. Okay. There are people like to get high, but you know what? There's a pressure to do it. There's a pressure. Everyone's making a l'chaim. Did you ever see when I have people over for Shabbos? Come on, Rabbi, make a l'chaim with us. And I take a l'chaim. Then another one, Rabbi, you didn't make a l'chaim with us. So there's a pressure to fill up another cup. I'm not liking the taste. I'm not liking the feeling. It's making me feel out of control. Why? What for? And there's this pressure, and people are hiding bottles under the table, and then they're taking it out. You've seen that? They hide the bottles under the table, and they take it out. You don't even trust the host, whoever the host is. They'll have enough alcohol. I got to bring my own bottle because I want to make sure I'm drunk tonight. You're all laughing, but you know what I'm saying is the truth. We got to make sure that we get drunk, so I'm going to have my bottles under the table. And this became a status symbol. Alcohol became a status symbol, and that's what the kids are getting. The kids are not suddenly enjoying the taste of alcohol. It tastes like it tastes to them, like it tastes to us. But what they're getting is it's cool. It's a status thing to drink it. And Motzei Shabbos, that's what you do is you drink Erev Shabbos. You take your Erev Shabbos L'chaim. And before you know it, you have your Erev Shabbos L'chaim, where everyone makes L'chaim before Mincha, which is a big question whether you could daven afterwards. And then afterwards you have your L'chaim, you have your L'chaim for Kiddush, then you have your L'chaim after the fish, then you have L'chaim at the table, and soon you're a drunkard. And soon you're doing it every week. And soon your kids are watching and they're becoming drunkards, and it's become an epidemic. There's no question. My father, with his tremendous wisdom, we get a lot of bottles because we have a lot of guests. So a lot of guests bring bottles. It's wonderful. If you're watching, that's fine. Thank you. We appreciate it. And I usually keep the bottles in like a little nice container, like this, so like a little wine cellar by my table. So you look nice. You put the bottle in, put the bottle on. And my father, in his wisdom, one day said, can I make a suggestion? Get rid of all of it. Put it in your room. Don't make it a thing. If it becomes a thing where the bottles, you got this fancy bottle and that bottle, and you take it out and you look at it, wow, this is an old bottle, it's an old wine, and then everyone's got to drink it and feel status, and then soon you've glorified alcohol. So let's call a spade. Now let's get some real wisdom. Rabbi Moshe Frankel.
For Moshe Frankel, thank you for having us. We're up on the Rav of the Kila, Rabbi Nasir, just for one quick words.
Thank you.
Shalom. I understand. Chazak Baruch, Kvod Rabbi Klatzko. Rabbi Klatzko, Chazak Baruch, Sher Koach. Yeah. I make very short few words. I come from a wedding now. I think better English for you, no? Not everybody understands Hebrew. Okay. ברשות כבוד הרב קלצקו שליטה and Rabbi Moshe Frankel from עמודים and קהל קדוש ונכבד. I know all of you from there, from 47, from Jamaica, his father president, and one very important lady here, my dear sister, I forget your name already many years. Lydia Mosheov. When we opened the synagogue in the beginning, she helped us a lot. Hashem bless all of you. Last week we have a rabbi here, Rabbi Amrami. He spoke about emunah ubitachon. He said a little more, like this. I don't know if I say in front of the people like this, but he said, you keep Shabbat, it's does not say you're religious. You eat kosher, glad kosher, you keep mikveh. What really show you religious? If you have emunah ubitachon. Everything happened to you, you say this from Hashem. Somebody take from you in the business 1 million, say from Hashem. Everything from Hashem. It's not easy, even your religious be this level. But very welcome, Kvod Harav. Okay, from MS, Rabbi Rutenberg Shlita, okay, very, very close to us, yeah. And I think the basic, but Chaval, usually come here 300 people, but Shabbat also was, 50%. Tonight I was wedding, and the parents of the bridegroom told me, Rabbi, maybe 30-40% of the guests not coming. Everybody say COVID, I don't know, sick. But the foundation of this is two things. One, the Rabbi Klatzko he touched. Definitely the way of Torah, yeshiva. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't guarantee for when give the Torah, he not give the Torah free like this, who be guarantee. When Bresel say, our Nevi'im, our father, Hashem say, no, I not accept. No, Abraham, no, Yitzchak, Yaakov even. When they say, our children be guarantee, okay. What they say? Hashem Aved Abraham, Hashem love Abraham. Why? Because he keep Shabbat. Shabbat is 5 levels more than Yom Kippur. What? Because he make chasadim, chesed, olam chesed ibane. Without chesed, the Gemara say, even you learn all the Torah, but you not make chesed, and you not nitzal me chevle Mashiach. And what? כי ידעתיו למען אשר יצווה את בניו ואת ביתו אחריו. שאני יודע, he teach the children, grandchildren, all generation the way of Torah. Number one, no question. But somebody told me, Rabbi, instead of you naive, go yeshivot, see what happened, boy, girl, you don't know, I take you a few places like this. I think Rabbi touched this point. The parents and the society, also the Ashemim.
They're at fault.
Yeah, the fault. Why? I go wedding, the people respect, Rabbi, Khalfa, Bukharian, 50 gram, 7 gram, and even I not sit yet, 50 gram, 100 gram, saying, oh, this, now young generation, young adult, think, if I drink, I am man, I am something. If I not drink, I am not this. Any place you go, Bachavot. One time I was here in engagement, Wadat, here in Bukharian community, one lady come, and teenager, I don't know, 17, 18, take the bottle, you make l'chaim. What is make l'chaim? 17-year-old, 16-year-old l'chaim. I think one of this, our fault. אנחנו אשמים בזה. Also, we have here Kiddush Shabbat, every Shabbat. Our Gabbai bring one bottle, finish, again another bottle, there, drink. Some woman told me, sorry, my English not so good, like your English. Some lady told me, Rabbi, please do favor. Don't give the men drink. They come home, they make crazy. You don't know, Please stop to give them. I think, I don't know how we make this. This is not my section, but כבוד הרב, בטח יודעים, אתם יודעים, לפרסם בתי כנסיות וזה. מה זה אלכוהול לחיים? Now, my father also drink, but like this. Was small, this, like Kiddush Kapla. Today, the Bukharian cup, drink green tea. They say, great. Like somebody sick, doctor say, somebody have COVID, drink all day with hot water, drink. What is drink? I think this the man, if he teach the people, make Kiddush Shabbat, Kiddush. Maybe you, Kvod Harav, speak with rabbis, they accept, like Psak Halacha, all synagogue make Kiddush, Kol HaKavod. This make more the community more close, more this is important. But no, number one, arak. If no arak, this is not Kiddush. If not vodka, they want tequila, maquila, I don't know. When they ask me, Rabbi, what do you drink? I say, bring me hot water, maximum green tea. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Even Kiddush, sometimes I cannot drink too much wine, but אני סומך על השיטה שאם כולם שותים ביחד מצטרף, אז הרב הראשי was my guest, מנוחתו בגן עדן, הרב בקשי דורון, also he say, אוקיי, אפשר לסמוך בדיעבד, שאני שותה, אשתי שותה, זה שותה, כולם ביחד, all of us we drink, זה מצטרף לשיעור הזה, כי יש לי גם בעיות עם אסד, זה. But what is it? I don't know the people. Like the rabbi said before, you not enjoy. You enjoy from chocolate, from halwa, from, a good cake. What is this? The people drink like this, feel bad, and after take some. אז אני חושב, כבוד הרב, מחילה, אם אתם תעשו באורגניזציה שלכם לפרסם, כל הרבנים, ללכת לדבר עם הרב אולבם, רבנים חשוב, שהרב בן חיים, הרב בדין גאון, לדבר עם דיינים, עם פוסק, להוציא פסק הלכה, אוקיי, מצווה לחזור לחיים, מקסימום לחיים like this, no לחיים again, לחיים 100 time לחיים, like you said before, מנחה ערבית, מעריב, after fish, before you cannot eat fish with meat together. I don't make a little long story, ואני חושב שזו נקודה מאוד חשובה. This year, Rabbi know better than me, what I have information, like from, Queens, I know between 20 to 30 young, 20 something until 30 passed away. Like you said before here, somebody, the parents say, what happened? The close, not the reason. Say reason, what, God forbid, cancer, they don't say, COVID, what? No, לא יודעים, they don't know. I think this, פסק הלכה, שמרתם נפשותיכם, ככה צריך להיות. היום באים, Another thing, somebody told me, it's not my credit, I take the credit. Rabbi, all synagogue make Kiddush and L'chaim. What do you learn our children? What learn our children? Our next generation, what learn from us? L'chaim, this the men, סקול המצוות, ואני רוצה להודות גם לרבי יניב מאירוב, שהוא מארגן את זה, וגם לכבודו. רבי? או רבי, שם מתאים. אוקיי, כל טוב ולילה טוב. תודה רבה. Thank you.
Call upon Rabbi Chazak Baruch Rabbi.
Thank you.
I'm going to call upon Rabbi Akiva Rudenberg, the co-founder of Emmett Organization.
Thank you, Rabbi, for putting this together. I know a lot of people weren't able to make it. A lot of people are sick today. B'ezrat Hashem, everyone should feel better. If it's not the flu, it's COVID. If it's not COVID, it's a cold. There's something else, strep throat. I know quite a few people are watching this on the live feed. And thank you, Rabbi Nasir, for making the shul available for such important events. The topic we're speaking about now is a topic that's very important to all of us. Unfortunately, it doesn't get as much attention when there isn't a tragedy within the 2 weeks before that. And it's a very sad reality that we become so accustomed that if something bad happens, where it's on our mind for about, a week, 2 weeks, and then we move on to the next, as somebody put it nicely, the crisis du jour, the crisis of the moment. But in reality, this issue is not something that should be addressed after a crisis, but it should be addressed really all the time, and we need to go to the core issues of what's behind this. So the latest data that just came out about overdoses in America are beyond scary. In 2018, I believe there was about 50,000 deaths from overdoses, and they said this is staggering, we can't believe it hit this high. 2019, it hit 70,000. 2020, what I'm seeing is over 100,000 deaths from overdoses. And COVID definitely played a role in it, but it's really a staggering amount of people. Even one person, of course, is too much. But the amount of people and the trajectory where this is going is extremely, extremely scary. I saw something, and I just searched it online to make sure it's accurate because it didn't sound right, but I saw it in multiple places, which doesn't mean it's true, that enough fentanyl, which is a synthetic type of usually opioid, was seized last year to kill every single American. Okay, I saw this data and I was like, this is crazy, but I saw it in multiple places that data. So just to give you an idea of how deadly this stuff is, a good friend of mine who's a therapist who comes to the Emmett retreats told me this at the retreat in 2019 that he had a patient from Queens who was who overdosed on fentanyl, and the ambulance came to take this person to the hospital. The teenager who was taking the fentanyl survived, I think with Narcan and other techniques. The mother of this boy, of this young man, went into the room. She had no idea that he was using these things and was cleaning up the mess. And one little speck of this fentanyl ended up in her eye, and she died. And this was his patient. That's like first-hand account, because her tolerance, he had built up a tolerance towards these things. She had no tolerance, and one little dot, speck of this. These drugs are made synthetically, so they're made with tremendous amount of power, and it's like we're saying, it's beyond scary what's going on. The main message that I just wanted to share is that there's a mistake and a fallacy I think that we have, that these issues affect other people. They affect those families that are not put together. They affect the other people. Well, that person, the family that's dysfunctional, the people that don't have their life together. And unfortunately, it's not true. Unfortunately, these issues affect throughout society. It could be a person from the best family who got involved in the wrong things. Sometimes it's somebody who's looking for attention. They started with a gateway drug and ended up with this. Sometimes they may have even started with a prescription drug that was given to them after an accident. I hear this so often. Somebody has a foot injury, a sports injury, and they give them an opioid. And the person has an addictive type personality. And a lot of people have addictive type personalities. And this particular person, he gets addicted to it. Rush Limbaugh, who passed away this past year, he became addicted to opioids, starting with some back injury he had, and he became addicted so much so he lost his hearing from and this wasn't synthetic. The synthetic stuff are the stuff that seems to be killing, the most. So I think first and foremost, we cannot judge and we cannot assume that this is happening to other people. This is happening, unfortunately, to any part of our society, and it's something that we all have to be aware of and be conscious of. The other point that I wanted to mention, and this is, I think, a very important point about addiction in general, is there's a famous TED Talk that said this idea, but I believe this idea is really backed up through many different places in modern psychology as well as Torah sources, which is, what is the opposite of addiction? What would you say? What's the opposite of addiction? Right. Oh, so the normal response that people assume, and I think I would have assumed also the same thing, the opposite of addiction is not addiction. So there are people who are addicted, and there are people who are not addicted. But what they've shown is that actually the opposite of addiction is really connection. And people who have healthy connections to their family, healthy connections to Hashem, healthy connections to themselves, a healthy sense of self. If people have a healthy connections, then addiction is it's like disgusting to us. We don't want to be addicted. We don't want to be, right? But the reality is, and this is unfortunately the reality of our society today, that we have more addictions today than I think we've ever had. Almost everybody is basically addicted to something, whether it's their smartphone, whether it's food, whether it's something. We have addiction is very, very common today, and I would say that connection, right? If you graphed it, addiction's at an all-time high, and connection, true, real connection, is at an all-time low. Right? Even with our own children, sometimes we don't look in their eyes because we're busy on our phones, texting, doing something else. Right? The true connection is very scarce today, and if we really want to deal with the core issue that creates addiction, that addiction comes from, I think it would behoove us to focus on connections and focus on how can we create healthier connections in our own life with each other, with ourselves, with Hashem, and ultimately with our society around us. And it's no simple solution to this, but I would argue, and this is something I'm not preaching this, I'm trying to work on this myself, that it needs to start with yourself. If you want to have a healthy connection with another person, with your family members, and ultimately beyond you, it needs to start with having a healthy sense of connection with yourself, which means some people would say it's journaling, it's really self-work, where you're stopping for a moment. We live in a society today, we don't like to stop. We don't like to even think for a moment. We're uncomfortable when we have to pause. Even just for a moment of pause creates discomfort in us. And that discomfort, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, the Zichron Levacha, talks about it beautifully in his talks about self-esteem. And there's a talk online where he talks about how he came to be aware that he had a self-esteem problem. And it was only I think he was about 38 years old. He had no idea that he had any issues with self-esteem. And he was running a hospital in Pittsburgh, a 200-300 bed psychiatric hospital. He was working nonstop. And he says that he had started having back pain, which we know back pain and a lot of psychosomatic and or mind-body disorders that we are stressed, we put into our body. And he went to a spa. This is, I think, in the 1960s, early 1960s. He went to a spa in the Midwest. And in the spa, they said, in order to sit in this special water, healing waters, you first have to take a regular bath for 20 minutes. And he said 5 minutes into the bath, he said, I'm done. And they said, no, you have to sit here for 20 minutes. He said, I'm done. He could not, it was Gehenna for him to sit for 20 minutes. And he called one of his coaches afterwards, his mentors, and he came to realize at that time that he had an issue with self-esteem. He didn't know until he was that age. Because he said there was no reason for my childhood, everything was good. And in this talk that he gives, I think I saw it on simpletoremember.com, in this talk, he says that at that point, I think he wrote 70 books. I think at the end he wrote over 90. But he says, I didn't write 70 books. I wrote one book 70 different ways. Self-esteem. That's all my books about self-esteem. And he didn't know himself that he had a problem with self-esteem until he was 38 years old. Right? So, da'as atzmacha, know yourself. Right? So I think that if we, there's a famous quote. It's quoted to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. I've heard it quoted to others as well. That he says, when I was young, I thought I was going to change the world. And then when I got older, I said, I'm going to change my country. I got older, I said, I'm going to change my city. And finally, I said, let me change my family. And then ultimately, let me change myself. When he got really old, he realized, let me just try to change myself. And he said, had I started off changing myself, I would have actually changed my family, my city, my country, and everyone else. So I think that we need to think about in this topic of addiction, if we want to go to the real prevention of addiction, the real prevention doesn't start when somebody is already addicted. The real which of course we need Amudim and the amazing things that Amudim is doing. And it's actually a project that we're working on with Rabbi Gluck, Rabbi Ilan Meir is involved, Rav Akta and others, to hopefully have a liaison within Amudim that's going to be specifically working with the community here. And Amudim is doing amazing work. But if we want to go even before that, and we want to go real prevention, Rabbi Nasirov talked about the l'chaims at the Kiddush Club, but I would say it's also our children, our cousins, our relatives. We are the role models to them. If they see that we have one l'chaim, we're able to stop, that's actually in a way better than not having any l'chaims at all. Because we show them that it's okay to have a l'chaim, but we're in control. But when they see that we're not in control, that in order for us to put a simchas hachaim, we have to have 5-6 l'chaims, that we're not, right? So the message that they get from that is that this is normal behavior, right? And the more we are connected, the more we give over connection, the more we can be connected with people around us. And I think that's a major part of the prevention that we all are all able to do, is to be conscious and aware of this. And then, of course, when we know of a problem, to address it. But like I said before, not to look at this as like, oh, this is somebody else. Because when we have that attitude, often we push it under the carpet. We say, oh, it's not happening in my family. It can't be happening here. We ignore it, and we don't help anyone by ignoring these issues. There should not be shame and guilt. One of the ideas that's talked about throughout in so many of these TED Talks and so many of these people who speak about the topics of how to really deal with drug abuse and how to really deal with these things, is that there's a tremendous amount of shame and guilt that in our society we put on the person who uses the drugs. We should put the shame and guilt on the drug pushers. Let's shame them away. But the one who's using drugs, we should not be shaming them. We need to go understand where it's coming from and really try to connect with them. Okay.
I want to call upon Moshe Franco to thank his help for arranging this event. It's great. He's going to speak about from Amudim, the resources from Amudim, and also do a Narcan training also. Moshe Franco.
Thank you everybody for coming out tonight, and to those who unfortunately couldn't make it and are joining us on the live stream. I'm going to echo a lot of the ideas that have been said before me. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit short because I want to get into the Narcan idea. Just on that last piece about not shaming the addicts, absolutely it's true. although I really think there's a piece before that, a lot of the addiction really stems from issues of shame. And if you follow through on all those TED Talks and what the people speak about, a lot of that comes from the shame. The drugs does something. It's filling an emptiness. And if we could really work on that prevention piece beforehand, avoid that shame, so they don't need to come to that. We're wrong. We're shaming what they're doing. They're shaming the tool that they're using because they're doing the best they can with the little that they have. But we got to start much earlier to avoid that sense of shame from the beginning. Give them that sense of connection. And I love that. I mean, I use it all the time. We have a program for at-risk youth, and our tagline really is where connection begins, because we say that also. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. So again, thank you for having me out here, and thank you for doing this event and all the people, Robbie, who I dealt with, and everybody else who's been involved to make this happen. From the community standpoint, from the Rav, and the different speakers that came in, to show that this is an important topic that needs to be dealt with. And yes, Saul, you're absolutely right that we don't deal with it, we don't speak about it enough, but I just have to say, in defense of the community, we're doing better. Ray Klatsko says that this happened the last 20 years, it's gotten so much worse, and it's gone into our community, and I would argue that it's really been here a lot longer than that, unfortunately. 20 years ago, I'm working this already. And 20 years ago, we really didn't want to talk about it. 20 years ago, this could never have happened. The idea that communities are willing to give up over the shul, the idea that people are willing to come out to talk about this topic, the idea that a Rav Gavin said, this is important, this is Pikuach Nefesh, that never would have happened 20 years ago. There are people who died of overdoses, unfortunately, that I'm aware of, back in the 80s. So to say it didn't exist is disingenuous. You're absolutely right that today's generation is certainly dealing with the idea of addiction much more. It permeates our lives, but it's always been there. And we have to deal with these things. We have to deal with them up front. And I'm not here to judge anybody who has their own levels of shame and are not ready to speak publicly about it. But as a community, we are getting better, and there's still a lot more work to do. And that's the first thing always whenever I come out, whenever I speak, and I'm speaking frequently, is just really amazing that we're willing to have this in our schools, have this in our communities, have this in our shuls, to really discuss and recognize that addiction is a real thing. And addiction, we're not immune to it. We used to like to believe that from community, this doesn't happen by us. And the reality is that addiction is addiction. Addiction does not discriminate. Addiction affects everybody. Doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter what your socioeconomic position is, your religious affiliation. Addiction has the ability to penetrate at the end, and it fills an emptiness, and it fills a need. And the truth is, and the first thing I would say with parents, they want to know, why is my kid used, or what's going on. The first thing I would really say is that drugs, alcohol, they're great. They feel good. They make us feel good. They make us perform better. Whatever it is, they're filling some need in the beginning. Because we all know that it's bad, so why are we using? Yet people use. Because in the beginning, it's filling something. In the beginning, it's doing something that makes us feel good. And we chase what feels good, especially if we're feeling empty, especially if we're not getting that, if there's something missing. So if we're not going to talk about it, and we're going to assume it's okay, and we're going to present that like, hey, this is a great thing in our schools or whatever, then of course our kids learn that, hey, that's what I'm going to use. So the first thing is really get it out of the shadows and be able to talk openly and honestly and deal with it. Because drugs don't discriminate, and we're all susceptible to it. So I do think that we are getting better, and we're willing to start engaging and make a difference, and I'm really honored to be a part of this, and I appreciate everybody. I just want to really touch on a few small pieces because I want to get into the Narcan. But Narcan is great and it's amazing, but ultimately Narcan's a Band-Aid, and obviously we got to get to those beginning pieces to that prevention. So there's always two factors that we talk about that increase a person's drug use. What's the likelihood that someone will use drugs? What's the likelihood that they will generate this addiction? And that's perception of risk and peer usage, or to say the perception of relative safety. right? And then the peer usage, right? Peer pressure is a big thing. We even said that at the L'chaim's, right? For class, we said that at his house when somebody comes over and there's pushing in, we're talking about how great the bottle is. For teenagers, certainly, all we talk about is that peer pressure. So when we see our peers using, when we see our parents using, when we see our neighbors using, when we see the people that we respect, the people that we interact with, that they're using, we're more likely to use. Now, we could always argue about how, it's different than how I'm using, and I'm more responsible, less responsible, but we're not giving over those messages. Rabbi Weiber once said that values are he said that they were absorbed, not learned. Values we get by seeing, right? By how people act, not what they necessarily tell us. So if we're seeing that our peers are using, we're seeing that people in shul are using, then there's a greater likelihood that we too will come to use. The other thing is the idea of relative safety. The same concept. We know conceptually that drugs are bad, but this isn't a drug and this isn't bad and alcohol's okay because we see that that's what's used, especially in today's world with the change and the shift in the world's view on substance use. The idea that it's safe, it's medical. Again, that was always funny to me. We say it's medical, right? So that must mean that translates good. But going for cancer treatment is also medical, right? But we don't recommend that that's what people do. It's when you have a lack of anything else. So then we can come on to using this. That's medical. It's medically approved. It doesn't mean it's good. We're not talking about it. So we're just allowing the world to educate us. And the world says, this is totally safe. This is okay. And once we open that door, and once we start, then we're likely to follow through. So what are we presenting to our kids? What are we teaching them? What are we modeling them? Less what are we saying? So if I go in on my business trip and I don't have time to go shopping, I'm so busy with everything, but I come back with that $400 bottle from duty free and that's what's exciting, that's what my kids know. They know that's the most important thing. If that's what if we're not thinking about what we're going to model, if we're not going to be conscious of the decisions that we make, and again, you may be fine, your usage may be safe, but will the next person's? Because that's what's going to spread it. If we don't change the way that we deal with things, right? Every addict, nobody woke up and said that, I want to be an addict. Everybody thinks they have it under control. Everybody thinks that they know that they're going to be okay and they're going to be fine. And maybe you're right, but will your friend be so lucky? Will your kid be so lucky? Will your neighbor be so lucky? As a community, we need to change the way that we deal with these things. And obviously, the other thing that is important is if somebody's not happy, if somebody doesn't feel like they belong, if they're not socially integrated, if they don't feel connected, then they're more likely to use, right? Like what was stated before, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. If we don't feel a part of things, if we don't feel like we belong, whether we're consciously telling them that or that's the message that we're sending, then I'm more likely to find something else. The way I would describe substances are your best, worst friend. They'll always be there for you. When you talk to a real addict, he'll tell you all the reasons why I shouldn't use. And if I use, this is what's going to happen, this is what I'm going to feel, it's going to make everything worse, and I really don't want to do it, it's going to ruin it, I'm going to be so upset, I'm going to be so depressed. And then they'll walk out of that conversation and go use. Because at the end of the day, right now, I can't live with this feeling. Right now, I'm not okay. And right now, I know my drug will be there for me. We need to create that culture, that space. We need to be aware of people where that people can feel connected to it. I mentioned the summer camp that we run and the work that I do with teenagers, and that's always been our main focus. The primary goal is always that sense of belonging, that you're a part of this, that you matter, not because you're fitting our mold, not because you're going to fit into what we expect, but because you're one of us, because you belong, because you're part of this. We need to create that culture that they're connected. And I remember I sat with a boy once, right after one of his friends, unfortunately, overdosed, and he asked, why not me? I've been with these friends. I had so many friends, unfortunately, have overdosed. And I'm still here. And honestly, I don't know what it is. But maybe that's the difference. Maybe the difference is that he belonged to something. that he was part of something. He always had a place to come back to. He was able to survive, able to make it through, to make it through another day. And thank God today he's married, child, and doing well, and giving back to that next generation. So again, I don't want to really, I could talk about drugs all night. I want to just jump into the Narcan training, but we have to really focus on that, on the idea that if we want to prevent this, then we need to be able to talk about it. We need to be able to see what that demon is, and we need to be able to make people feel like they belong. That's not what they need. It's not what they need to go to. So I'm just going to have somebody hand out the Narcan quickly, and anybody who's not here, at least this is an opportunity to just understand what the Narcan is and what the benefit is of it, because it truly is something that can save a life. And I think I'll leave some with the shul, so if somebody needs to get it and they know how to use it, and if Mr. Hashem will try to create other opportunities where we can, distribute the Narcan or talk about the Narcan a little bit. So we're going to go through it now very quickly, okay? So we're going to really go through, I'm not going to focus so much on is there a crisis? Clearly we're here tonight. We recognize there's a crisis. Some of the previous speakers spoke a little bit about that, but we're going to talk a little bit about what are opiates, and obviously there's lots of different drugs, and they all need to be to deal with. What we're dealing with in America now, unfortunately, is this opiate crisis, and it's really blown up. So you mentioned fentanyl and the effects that's happening on that. So it's a problem, and we really need to deal with it. And the crazy thing is that we really have a resource that can really make a difference, that can truly save a life. So we need to try to get that out there and to educate people so that they know what it is and they can respond and truly save a life. So we're going to say, what are opiates? What is Narcan? And then how to identify an opiate overdose and how to respond to it, what to do. So opiates essentially are painkillers. They're pain relievers. And this includes a whole category of pain relief, which is not, when we talk about the opiate epidemic and the overdose problem, people think about heroin and they think about the junkie in the street or the needle in the arm, and the reality is that opiates are not just heroin. Opiates is a whole, range of medications, some of them that are prescribed, that people are using. And what they do is that they're able to block pain, whether that's physical pain, whether that's emotional pain. They block pain and create these feelings of euphoria, of contentment. They typically can stay in your system for up to 6 hours. And what they do is they'll relax a person, block the pain, but they also cause a person's breathing to slow down. And eventually, with enough of the opiates, will cause the breathing to actually stop, which is an overdose. And again, the reason we have pain, nobody likes pain, but pain is our body's way of telling us, hey, there's a problem, you gotta deal with that. When we stop breathing, generally, we recognize, hey, that's not a good thing, this isn't very comfortable, and we try to breathe. When a person is taking the opiates, they're not necessarily bothered by that. And the breathing will slow and relax and calm and eventually stop. Now, opiates includes a whole class of medications, not just your typical heroin, but includes things such as hydrocodone, oxycodone, morphine, codeine. These are all opiates, many of them that are prescribed. You go to get your cavity, your wisdom teeth pulled, and the doctor, the dentist will prescribe opiates. And most people go home and not necessarily thinking about that. They don't think it's a big deal. And they'll take it or they won't take it. And they're not very conscious. I actually had somebody who spoke to me that he went to the dentist and he got his opiate and says, take every 4 hours. And he religiously, what the dentist says, his tooth wasn't even hurting him anymore. And he's taking this every 4 hours on schedule. And finally his wife stopped and is like, you're slurring your words. You're loopy. What's going on? And he had to stop and realize, wait, this is a problem. But the dentist told him, you take your medication. So he took his medication, not realizing how quickly this can have an effect. Other things that are opiates are things such as methadone, which is actually used to treat an opiate addiction, as well as fentanyl, which was mentioned earlier, which is a big part of the recent uprise in these overdoses. It's just fentanyl, which is a synthetic heroin. It's much more potent than heroin, And when you talk about one dot, that could be enough for somebody to have a fatal overdose. That's really what it is. What it would take, it's a fraction of what would take for heroin to overdose. It would just be 2-3 granules of fentanyl, of pure fentanyl, could cause an overdose. And the fentanyl actually has been a major problem because fentanyl is often cut into other drugs as well. So it's not just that you're getting in your heroin, but it's been found in marijuana. So people say, well, I don't do any hard drugs. I just do, smoke pot, and it's totally fine. It's totally phased. And that could be a whole separate, debate. But there have been instances when you're buying it from your street dealer, they'll cut it in because it gives you a much bigger high. And if I give the people a bigger high, then they'll come back. It actually was found that you would think that, you're killing your customer base, or that if other people find out, then, they're going to avoid it. And they actually found the opposite to be true. That if they've heard that this dealer had a overdose death, it would actually bring in more customers because clearly he's got the best stuff. So just briefly, very, very simply, what does opiates do? You have opiate receptors in your brain. The opiates lock onto those receptors and block the pain messages from getting around from the body to let you know there's a problem. Now, what puts a person at a greater risk of an overdose, right? Lots of people use, you go to the dentist, you take your medication, now everyone's overdosing. So what puts somebody at a greater risk of overdose? So there's a few different things that we talk about. The first thing is changes in tolerance, right? Tolerance was mentioned earlier. As we use substances, right, they talk about chasing the high. The first time I need a little bit and I feel good, that blocks the pain, it's good. But as I use more and more, it takes more and more to get that same feeling. And with that access, it's often what you have. The first time is amazing. The next time is not quite as good. And therefore, we're going to chase that, right? And we're going to try to get it. So you're using more, and that's also where that progression comes, right? So I try a drug that's, fairly benign, is not a big deal, and it doesn't give me quite that same high that I want, right? The first time is great. So the next time, if I'm looking to fill that void, if I'm looking to get that high, it's not just about having fun, then I'm going to find something else that's going to give it. So somebody who starts with something, that he would argue is safe, very quickly finds himself doing things that are, unfortunately, much stronger and much more fatal. So what happens is that as we use, we need more to get to that same place. The problem is that people often forget where they started. And this is really sad because unfortunately what we find is that very often the fatal overdoses actually happen after somebody's been clean, after somebody's doing well. And we always have this, and we speak to the families, he was doing so well, he just came out of rehab, he's been clean for weeks, he's been clean for months, and he has one bad day. And the problem is that on that one bad day, and the truth is addicts know this too. They cut back. It's like, okay, I'm doing 3 bags of heroin, now I'm only going to do 1 bag. But they don't remember that the first time that they used, 1 line was enough. They don't remember that the first time 1 Percocet was enough. And by the time they were done, they were taking 20, right? So they're going to cut back. They only do 10. But their body can't handle that anymore. So change in tolerance puts somebody at a much increased risk of, when they're using, of actually overdosing. Mixing drugs. When it comes to drug use, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, right? So you may be able to use X amount. You start mixing that with alcohol, with benzos, with other drugs, the effect on the body is much more extreme. Variation, strength, and content of drugs, right? When I know what I'm getting from my doctor, when I start changing it up. Well, I don't have my Percocets now, so I'm going to borrow your oxys. Or right now I got heroin from this dealer instead of going to somebody else. So getting that different strength and content, that increases a person's risk. Previous experience of a non-fatal overdose, and we'll get into this in a minute, but somebody who had a non-fatal overdose is significantly more likely, if they're to overdose again, for that next overdose to be fatal. Using alone also increases. We imagine an overdose as that needle in the arm. Somebody shoots up and that's it. The reality is that typically an overdose takes a significant amount of time and they are witnessed. So there is time to actually get involved and save the person's life. But somebody using alone where there's nobody there puts them at a greater risk of a fatal overdose. And obviously, use of any opiates puts you at a greater risk of overdose. you're significantly less likely to overdose if you don't use drugs. So what we say is an overdose, it represses the urge to breathe, the breathing slows down, breathing eventually stops, the heart stops, and that ultimately is death. This generally happens over the course of 1 to 3 hours. It doesn't happen immediately. I think they say that that sort of immediate overdose is probably in about 15% of the cases. The vast majority of them happen over the course of time. And like we said, most overdoses are actually witnessed, and there's actually time, if you know what to do, or you know what is happening, to actually intervene and save a life. So what's Narcan? So I think we passed out the bags, and again, we'll leave some here in the shul. Narcan is basically, it's a safe, effective medication that reverses the effects of an opiate overdose. It literally will take a person immediately, almost immediately out of overdose and into withdrawal. It has no effect on a person if opiates are not present. So you could do it now, assuming that you're not taking anything, and it won't have any effect. There's no negative effects to it. There's no negative health risks. There's no risk of dependence. There's no addictive properties. There's no known allergies. And it's totally safe and won't do any harm if there's no opiates present. Essentially, how does Narcan work? Narcan, those same receptors that opiates bind to, Narcan binds to those same opiate receptors. It just binds tighter, so it'll knock the opiates off the receptors. Again, a very simplified. They'll knock the opiates off those receptors and block the opiates from binding. Huh? We're going to do it in a second. But that's what the chemical actually does. It's goes in that brain, and will knock the opiates off the opiate receptors, and therefore not allowing the opiates to bind to those receptors, and therefore really putting a person right into withdrawal. We'll take them right out of that overdose. They'll be breathing again. They'll be conscious. They'll be feeling that pain. Usually it happens almost immediately within, it says 2 to 5 minutes. Usually it would happen really even quicker than that. So there's actually 2 doses in the bags. And we say, you give that first dose. If you're not getting a response within, 3-4 minutes, give the second dose, because it really should happen almost instantly. Now, Narcan lasts for 60 to 90 minutes. Now, this is an important number, because if we remember what we said earlier, right, that opiates stay in the system for up to 6 hours, and an overdose generally takes from 1 to 3 hours. So when we talk about that if somebody has a non-fatal overdose, they're significantly more likely to have a fatal overdose if they overdose again. That's this reason, right? The Narcan stays in a person's system for up to 90 minutes, right? So what happens when we give a person Narcan? So right away they go into withdrawal, and they're likely to not be so happy about that. That doesn't feel good. So often a person will try to use again. The problem is, what happens when you use again? Nothing, because there's Narcan in the system. And therefore, 90 minutes later, there's all that opiates that was in the system to begin with, which was enough to put him into an overdose. And if you introduce any more into the system, he's in a significantly more dangerous position if you were to overdose a second time following a non-fatal overdose. And then again, the Narcan only works on opiates, so it won't have any effect if there are any other substances in the person's system. So if this overdose is not opiate related, but it's due to alcohol, benzos, or some other medical condition, the Narcan won't have any effect on that. That being said, again, just to reiterate, it also won't do any harm. All right? So if there's no opiates present, it won't harm a person, which means if you think somebody may be experiencing an opiate overdose, give the Narcan, because it's not going to hurt them, and you just might save their life. Okay, so the signs of an opiate overdose. What you're looking for is clearly, obviously, if you know that the person is using drugs, that's something to be to give a person pause. That maybe there's an overdose here. What you're looking for essentially is it slows the breathing. So you want to see if there's slowed or stopped breathing, bluish, grayish lips or nails or nail beds, and an unresponsiveness. So the first thing that you really want to do is try to wake that person up, try to get a response from them. And we talk about sternum rub. If it's your friend, push him around, try to get him to wake up. Right? As much as we say that there's no negative and it can't do any harm, you still don't necessarily want to walk over to every random homeless person and start sticking things up their nose. They probably won't appreciate it. Try to wake the person up. If you have reason to believe that may be an overdose, meaning you're seeing that lack of breathing, unresponsiveness, bluish, grayish nails, you know that they've been using drugs, are all good reasons, give the Narcan. What we would say is the first thing really is probably call 911. If you have somebody else with you, have them call 911. And then, because once you get the Narcan, they're going to wake up, and they may not be as appreciative as you'd like them to be. That you just saved their life because you also took away that high, and they may want to use again, they may be annoyed. So call 911, have 911 come, and in the meantime, you administer the Narcan. And if you open up the Narcan kits, you'll see there is 2 doses of Narcan, and then you have this blue card, which is essentially the prescription card. The Narcan is basically very simple. It's a nose spray. The first thing you want to do, try to wake the person up. If they're unresponsive, have somebody call 911 and administer Narcan. All you're going to do is peel down the back. We'll open a new one. Pull out the Narcan. It's a single dose. Each one is a single dose of Narcan, 4 milligrams of Narcan. There's no cap, there's no cover. Put it in the person's nostril, and that's it. It's depressed, it's done. If the person doesn't wake up, then give the second dose. Usually we would say if you give it in one nostril, give it in the other nostril. The reality is it all goes to the same place, and therefore if you're not sure, just give the Narcan. It doesn't matter. The reason we say try to alternate is in case there's a blockage or something that you can't see, and that's why the first dosage didn't have an effect. Therefore, given the other nostril. But again, the important thing is to administer it. After you give the Narcan, the person is likely going to be in withdrawal. You want to stay with them. You want to make sure that they don't use again. And again, we said this before, but it's really important. If they used the first time, there was a reason, and now they're going to be uncomfortable, and they may likely want to use again. You need to stay with them or have somebody stay with them to not let them use again. And that's why it's also important to call 911, let them be there so that they can try to get this person help. Try not to leave them alone. If you have to leave somebody alone, turn them on their side. That way, if, God forbid, they throw up, they don't choke on that vomit. But really the best thing is to not leave them and make sure that you have help come there. When it comes to calling 911, and it's just important to know, they found that they'd show up and they'd have these overdoses in situations where there were a lot of people around and nobody wanted to call 911. So they passed the Good Samaritan law, which means that a person can't be charged for an A2 felony offense. Right? They can't be charged essentially with this drug offense if they administer Narcan. Right? Now again, that doesn't mean that everybody who's there should keep partying and keep doing drugs and it's all great because we're all good. The guy who's given the Narcan is basically covered, and the cops aren't going to show up and arrest you. They want to save a life, and therefore they won't be charged. That being said, again, obviously if he's got an outstanding warrant, there's other things going on. We're not saying this covers everything, and they're not going to take away the cocaine on the table. They likely will. But, you really can save a life. It really makes a difference. So we need to call 911, get the cops there, get the ambulance there, get the person help, and don't leave them alone. If you use your Narcan, then, reach out to us. We'll replace it. We'll get more Narcan. If you look at the back, there is an expiration date. So again, if the Narcan expires, please again reach out to us, and we will replace that. The other thing about the Narcan is it really shouldn't be kept at extreme temperatures. So I used to always keep mine in the car, and I don't do that anymore. I keep it in my knapsack. If that's what you have, Narcan doesn't do harm. So if you happen to be in a situation, hopefully you won't need it, but if you happen to be in a situation and your Narcan's expired, or it was left in the car, I would say use it, but let's try to, avoid that, and if you need that replacement, then certainly, reach out to Mudim, and we will, refill whatever your needs are. Does anybody have any questions?
I may be misremembering, this is almost 2 years ago, but I recall the last time I did not entering this, and you're supposed to fill the head folder before you shut it up in the spray.
They have changed it. I mean, it used to be a whole thing that you have to put together. Now they're giving these out. It's not something that we've ever discussed. It could be that that was that individual's advice because he felt that it would get there. The spray works, and we've used them. The main thing is get it in there, and it'll have enough strength to reach where it needs to go. Just get it into the nose and administer the dosage. I wouldn't be so worried about, the positioning of their head. I would be worried about how I leave them so that they don't, God forbid, choke. But I'm not aware of that. But I'd be happy to look into it and find out a little bit more.
What is the approximate cost of one package like that?
So it's sponsored by the state and the city. So we get it from them and we give it out free of charge.
To give more out, maybe.
So we give it out free of charge. We get them from the state and from the city, and we're able to do it. I believe you can buy it in the pharmacy.
No, not to buy, just to give away. Is it costly? That's my question. Is it costly to give away to more population, younger people?
No, not to us.
Like it's possible to do, right?
Absolutely. We do as many as we can, and I speak to teenagers. I do it in school sometimes. I do it in drop-in centers and in situations such as this as well. But we get it again, whatever we use, we reach out when we order more and we get it from the state and we're able to give it out. It's not a problem.